Sounds in the Night. It was February of 2006 when I was attending college in my small town. The town itself was sparsely populated and about a 40 to 45 minute drive from my hometown in which I grew up in. In the 19 years in which I lived at home, I had never set foot in this town, nor have I thought I would have, as this town was said to be one of the most frightening places in the state. I will not say which state I resided in, as to keep my identity unknown, but the fear people felt for this town wasn't due to anything paranormal as many of you may think, as all of you might expect, but because the town itself was known as the crime hotspot of the state, with low-income individuals, many living near the brink of poverty. And as per usual, my parents were worried, as they were very overprotective whilst I was growing up. But deciding my want to finally become my own man, I decided to live despite their calls and protests. For the first 5 months, I got accustomed to the university life. The usual drunk elderly man calling me from across the street, to sketchy-looking teenagers that walked the streets at night while I went out to get groceries. I lived with a certain roommate at the time, but being somewhat of an antisocial individual, my relationship with my roommate rarely if ever got past the hello and good morning phase. He was a little bit older than I was at the time, probably in his late 20s or early 30s. It was on a cold February night that he told me that he would be moving in with his girlfriend, who lived in another part of the town. And because the owner of the house didn't have a new tenant to replace my roommate, I was to live alone in the apartment. And I was okay with that. I mean, I wasn't the most sociable guy, and didn't have the biggest group of friends anyways, so my time in that city had almost always felt like a solitude life anyways. I enjoyed that really. Spending my weekends playing games when I wasn't in class or watching stupid random TV shows until late in the middle of the night. It was peaceful. And soon, the silence settled in even greater when I was the lone person to inhabit such an empty space. At first, it was explainable. The creak of the doors, the sudden clatter from the old floorboards, or disintegrating walls. But then, things started to become more unusual. Oftentimes, I would be in my room and hear sounds of muffled talking or voices as if people were having a conversation somewhere. At first, I passed it off as sounds from outside, or maybe the crazies of the town having a party somewhere close to an open window. But eventually, the sounds of speaking grew louder and louder, and closer and closer. This particular phenomenon occurred on and off, on and off. One night it was there, the next it was not. For a little over 3 weeks this continued, and at first I ignored it. But endless nights grew when I focused on the sounds and I could identify almost familiar voices. Eventually one night, I finished watching some stupid videos on my computer and was ready for sleep since we had early morning 8 a.m. classes. I turned off my computer, but was stirred by the sound of what sounded like talking. Once again, I tried to ignore it, and just like it had the past 20 days, it kept going and going and going. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to take action. I finally rose from my bed and decided to confront this thing. I don't know why, it was that very night that I had this sudden courage inside of me grow. I opened the door to the dark hallway, with a purple glow from the adjacent street lamp flowing in. The talking still sounded far this time, but I distinguished a direction in which it was coming from. The empty room of my roommate. I stood there in the hallway, Could it have been maybe it was my roommate returning to grab some things or something like that? Or maybe having a late night get together with his friends cause his girlfriend wouldn't allow him to do it at her apartment? I stood, listening, then decided to creep to the room as slowly as I can, as I hear what I can imagine to be 3 or 4 people talking in muffled sounds, muffled voices. It sounded as if they were all locked in some plastic container. I walked closer to the door. I put my hand on a doorknob and I opened the door to the room, and like I expected, silence. Nothing there at all. After that night, the sounds of talking were never heard again. Unusually though, it was after this night that I decided to move from that house. I never found out the history behind the house or who made those sounds in the night. Could it have something to do with my roommate who moved out? It's been 10 years since then, and I've moved out of that town. Thus, I'll never know. But at least I'm able to satisfy my curiosity for my roommate's estranged room. Parking lot hit. Have you ever been hit by a ghost? I swear this happened to me. It was a February some years ago. I remember because it was a few days close to Valentine's Day, and me and my boyfriend were planning a trip to Cuba at the time. I worked late nights at Starbucks. Mostly, my shifts were from 6 p.m. onwards till the wee hours of the night, since our location was a 24-hour store. And aside from that, I myself had another part-time job during the day. On this night, I was finishing my shift close to around 11 p.m. at night, and I wasn't closing, so there were still other people around. I remember walking out of the store, still feeling like I could go home and maybe finish my book before hitting bed. I walked out to the parking lot when I suddenly heard a voice say, "Hey," right behind me. My immediate thought was that it was a coworker of mine who had maybe wanted to talk to me about something. I turned around with no one there. A little puzzled now, but still relatively nonchalant, I walked to my car. As I was pulling out my keys, I hear another "Hey!" This time louder, yet it sounded farther away. I turned again to see just the empty parking lot, with not a soul in sight and very few cars since it's so late. Kinda feeling freaked out, I quickened my pace to retrieve my keys, when suddenly I felt a very hard smack on the hand in which I had my keys in. It didn't feel like a hand per se, but a hard force that basically hit my hand, causing the keys to fall to the ground. At that moment I panicked, grabbed my keys from the ground, and got the hell out of there. After that one night, not a lot of other particular things happened at work, aside from the occasional rumor about the girls' washroom being haunted or whatnot, but I am sort of inclined to the paranormal and have been all my life, so maybe that's why. Still, never been so close, except for that night. The last time. On February 18, 2014, my grandpa Ernie died. Since I was a very young child, I was very close with Ernie, usually with him calling me his favorite little boy. I was his favorite grandson. During my earlier years in life, I had lived many days of the week at Ernie's, since my parents had had a divorce, and my mom lived with Ernie. In his youth, Ernie was a businessman who was respected by many and a yacht fanatic. We would talk for hours on end about different boats, and he would tell me stories of his many adventures and experiences out at sea. Of course, you must realize that they were probably mundane stories made to be greater than they were. But to the mind of a 10-year-old little boy, the stories sound like anything or even more than what could be found on television or in the movies. During his last days, Ernie developed a terminal illness that was deemed untreatable. His heroic and somewhat Robin Hood-like persona quickly began to slow down to a more modest but well-grounded wise caretaker for me. In his last days, I took him out to sea to feel nature once more, and the following week, I received a phone call of his death. As I grew older, my relationship with my other family members had never been too good. But Ernie is the only one that, when I saw him, I could feel like I was a kid again. On the night I received the news, I had a project at my firm which I needed to finish, so I stayed late in the night, pretending as if nothing were the case. No one knew about the passing of my late grandfather, and as the hours were nearing close to midnight, I fell asleep. As I was sleeping, I had a dream. Inside my dream was Ernie. He looked very sad and even waved me to come over to him. I don't remember the setting of this dream, but as I walked closer to Ernie in the dream, I realized that the closer I got to him, the farther Ernie was, just drifting away. I woke up with tears in my eyes. The next day, a colleague of mine asked me who I was talking to. She said that she had heard a voice like a man talking to me when she was about to leave the office. I was stunned. There was no one in the office with me that night. It was only me and my colleague, and after she had left, it was only me in that whole part of the building. I don't know. Could it have been my grandfather saying one final goodbye before he once again drifted off the sea?